Well, thank you very much for engaging in the questions and answers over this morning's speakers. We do have one more speaker that we're going to pull in from the US, and then we're going to go off to lunch. So what I might do is, we're just waiting for that speaker to come on board. Are we, we're all good to go? Excellent, okay. Well, we're running on time, which is great. So for about another 30 minutes before we break to lunch, we can have our final morning speaker. Her name is Perriane Bowring, and she's the president and founder of the Chamber of Digital Commerce based in Washington, DC in the US. This is an industry trade association set up to promote the acceptance and use of digital currencies and digital assets. The Chamber of Digital Commerce strongly believes that proactive engagement and dialogue with policymakers is crucial for the growing industry to achieve prosperity and a pro-growth regulatory environment. Perriane, hello, how are you?
Hi, great to be here.
Time to join at the GDCC Day 2. Could you just start off by giving us a bit of a background into how the Chamber of Digital Commerce came about and your role there, please?
Sure. I formerly worked on Capitol Hill for a member of the House Financial Services Committee, and that's where I first learned about Bitcoin. And then I later was working in the media. I was working as a broadcast journalist for an international news company, and Bitcoin was one of the topics that I covered on my show. And as somebody that was living and working in Washington, D.C. and had a background in public policy, during 2013, when we started seeing a lot of the scandals that plagued the industry, such as Mt. Gox and Silk Road, I quickly was able to recognize that there was need for formal representation. There was a need to have an organization to be a reliable source of information to public policymakers. So I spent some time gathering some peers and industry leaders and some of my colleagues, and we quickly formed the idea of the Chamber of Digital Commerce, which is a trade association located in Washington, D.C., with a focus of working with the U.S. Federal government and being a source to public policymakers, and we represent the industry's interest. Right now, what we kind of have is a recipe for disaster, because there's a lot of media hype around this industry with the different falls of exchanges, different scandals from Silk Road 2.0, and that coupled with public policymakers and regulators that don't have a clear understanding of what this technology is. So the media hype makes regulators feel like they have to do something. They feel called to implement investor protections or consumer protections, but yet they don't really know what this is. So that's a very, very dangerous recipe. So we're diligently working to bring a greater understanding about this technology. So as regulators look to provide policies, they're done in a way that promotes innovation and future growth of the industry.
Thank you for that. I'll pick up on some of the points you made. I'd just like to step back one, though. Could you give us an idea about how many members you have and what sort of membership schemes you have, or membership fees you have to kind of build and run your offices and engage in sort of policy research?
Sure. Well, we opened our doors in July. We're just building up our membership right now. One committee that we're recruiting for is the executive committee, and that's our policy forming committee. That's for industry leaders who want to have a seat at the table in these sophisticated policy discussions that are going to affect the entire industry. And then we have 4 tiers of membership under that range from $50,000 a year. You pay a member fee to be a part of this organization, but they go all the way down to $1,000 per year to be a member of the Chamber of Digital Commerce. We want to make sure that we have participants from all sides of the industry. There's obviously a lot of startups in this industry. Not all may have tons of funding, so we want to be inclusive for any type of company that wants to join. We'll be announcing our founding member class at the end of the year. We actually and we'll have an announcement to make on Friday that's coming out about who will be serving as our chairman of the executive committee. But so we'll have more news coming out soon. But we already have several venture capitalists that are part of our organization, and several of the larger funded Bitcoin type companies, including Overstock, that have joined the executive committee.
Excellent. And the executive committee, do you work with them to discuss and agree specific sort of public policy comments on digital currencies? Is that how you decide the association's position on things?
Right. So the executive committee is the policy forming committee of the organization who all has voting rights on the type of policies that we put forward. We haven't rolled out our policy strategies quite yet. We're still in formative stages of building this organization, and our public policy initiatives will start in January at the start of the new Congress. So we're right now busy building up the membership and putting together those strategies, and we'll have some of our first meetings here in the next couple of weeks.
Thank you for that. The impression that many people outside the US have about the political stroke lobbying system is that it requires pretty big investments. What's your thoughts on how you engage with politicians and what kind of resources do you need to do it effectively?
Well, we do not have the luxury of waiting. Public policymakers have taken a great interest into Bitcoin and blockchain technology, mostly because it's so disruptive, but also because it dabbles in the area of financial services. So part of it is technology-based, but also finance. And government takes that extremely serious. And with the media hype of a lot of scandals that's plagued this industry, regulators are looking to get involved, and we strongly believe that the next 12 to 15 months will be very, very formative in decision-making times for this industry, because there is a lot going on within just on the federal government. We're here on the ground in DC with the U.S. federal government. And there's over 10 agencies and departments just in DC that are looking at putting forward policies that are going to affect the entire industry. So we've put together a $1.5 million operating budget for 2015. We think this is a responsible amount of financial funds to deploy, but that should allow us to hire a team of about 10 people. We'll have a full advocacy office, and we'll also have an office working on brand management and public affairs, and we'll also be doing some coalition building as well. So it is extremely important that investors and the different startups in this space recognize that political, regulatory, and prosecutorial risk are one of the top risks to this industry, and without deploying resources to mitigate these risks could be very detrimental to the future of the industry.
Thank you for that. Could you give us a bit of an idea of the sort of the way that the electoral cycle in the United States can affect and impact not just your lobbying, but all lobbying?
What do you mean by that?
Well, so for example, you said right now you don't feel you have time. You've got to get out there, and you've got to be advocating the case for digital currencies. But obviously there are cycles in the electoral in the way that elections come and go. Does that impact you at all?
Not exactly. We see digital currency technology as nonpartisan. This is about innovation and technology. So we don't think this is a political or a partisan issue, and we're pushing very hard to make sure it never becomes one. It's really about understanding the potential benefits of this technology and making sure that as regulators are looking to put forward policies, that they have a clear understanding of what this is. That's what's most important. But what we're seeing the most action is within the agencies. That's separate of Congress. So these are rules and regulations that often get implemented without congressional scrutiny or oversight. So it's extremely important that we have resources working with the administration, working with agencies, working with U.S. Congress, and also working with state governments. There's a lot of moving parts here.
And in terms of there's some very, very large banks and financial institutions in the US, Citigroup, for example. What's their sort of public policy on digital currencies and Bitcoin?
That's a very interesting question, and we haven't seen a lot of public information come out from the traditional financial institutions on their public position on Bitcoin and blockchain technology. But one of the biggest friction points, and I would say is one of the top 3 friction points in the industry, is banking Bitcoin. And there are many financial institutions who will not give bank accounts to companies operating in this space who are even tangentially associated with Bitcoin. So that's a major problem. So, another challenge that the Chamber of Digital Commerce is looking to overcome is reaching out to the financial services industry and explain to them what this technology is, how it could benefit their business, how it could, bring how it could strengthen their respective business practices and build that bridge between the digital currency industry and the traditional system, because I think if we work together, we'll get better results than trying to fight for market share.
Thank you. You mentioned that a key part of your role is to talk about good stories that come out of the use, adoption of digital currencies. Can you give us a couple of examples of, let's say, for example, a couple of recent media stories where you've helped position the not necessarily the association, but the Chamber of Digital Commerce, but the adoption and use of digital currencies in a very positive way, either in TV or print?
Sure, and I think it's important to note that the media plays a big role in public policy making because it very much shapes the public's opinion, which puts pressure on public policy makers. So it is very important that we take control of the narrative of this industry. So, one example is technical solutions to industry problems. With the fall of Mt. Gox, we're seeing different types of technologies come forward that can bring sort of a self-regulatory aspect to these types of problems. One would be multi-signature technology. So it's important that we have stories out there that explain what this is and what kind of issues it addresses. And even payment processors, you have the issue of volatility. And a lot of times people say, well, Bitcoin is not a currency or can never operate as one because the volatility is too high. And you can always go back and say, well, there's companies like Coinbase and BitPay, merchant servicers, who will come in and they'll accept the Bitcoin on the merchant's behalf. And if they don't want to hold any, they can transfer them to US dollars or whatever currency you operate in right away. That way the merchant is never exposed to Bitcoin or its volatility. And it's important that people understand this. And there's still a lot of people that have no idea what these services exist. Also, auditing exchanges. There was an article that came out not too long ago about Chinese exchanges, Bitcoin exchanges on average have 104% reserves, and they're doing proof of audits live. There's different companies that publish, like BitReserve has a proof of audit, and you can go to their website anytime and see that your assets are there. This is vastly different than anything that the financial industry is used to looking at. So it's explaining these types of industry solutions to make people more comfortable with the technology. But something else that the Chamber of Digital Commerce is looking to do is to serve as a better business bureau and to have consumer protections, industry best practices that can be widely used across the industry, so people understand what types of companies are safe to use, which ones aren't, while we're still building the regulatory framework.
Thank you. So can I just confirm, one of your thoughts is to have some kind of accreditation program?
I think it would be very helpful, and that's definitely something that we're talking about building, having some sort of a consumer reports type service or a better business bureau where we can go through different types of companies and explain why this one's more safe than another one, or this one meets what we consider industry standards as best practices. And so we don't have the issue like Mt. Gox again. But what's so interesting about Mt. Gox is that people within the industry that knew the Bitcoin industry well knew that Mt. Gox was not a safe place to store Bitcoin. But because it was so big, anybody who was just new into the industry that just Googled Bitcoin exchanges. Mt. Gox was probably the first one that came up because it was the largest. So you had people who didn't have a full understanding of the risk because they were very new to the industry and they were putting their money in a place that wasn't safe. So this is a role that an organization like the Chamber of Digital Commerce could serve to make sure that consumers and customers have just basic information on consumer protection so we can avoid a catastrophic issue like Mt. Gox in the future.
I know the traditional banking system, the regulators are very keen to make sure that, and certainly with banks, that no bank is too big to fail. And it's almost the opposite situation for digital currencies, where there's often a lack of information. Do you think that that's a revenue stream for the association, that you charge people to almost provide like an audit and an understanding of their business and their organisation?
We haven't talked about that being a revenue stream. We're recognized by the IRS as a 501c6, so we're technically a business league, a trade association. So the majority of our budget, according to the IRS code, has to come from member fees. I think that's a service that we would love to be able to help out with, but it's not something that we would see as as our main goal. Our main goal is to work with public policy makers.
Excellent. I'll just also ask you, if I may, you mentioned that there were a number of sort of different government agencies and departments that are all looking to understand and regulate Bitcoin digital currencies, but from perhaps different directions and perspectives. Could you sort of give us an idea of who they are and what their interest in digital currencies is?
Yeah, absolutely. So starting with the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service, they've already put out guidelines on how to tax virtual currency. I think there's a lot of questions that the IRS has not provided guidance on. So they're still looking at this to make sure there's more clarity as to how to tax this. And it's important that the industry is working with the IRS in these discussions to make sure they have a better understanding of how this works, so we can get the most favorable tax treatment terms. The Department of Justice works very closely with the Security and Exchange Commission. The SEC has already prosecuted, have brought forward 3 cases. 2 have been prosecuted and found liable for securities laws. Most of those cases were really based on Ponzi schemes, and it really had nothing to do with the fact that these were Bitcoin-related companies, but they are looking at Bitcoin specifically as that a security. And that's a discussion that has not fully been. The SEC has not came out and said if they see Bitcoin as a security or not, but I did learn this week in meetings with the SEC that they have a Bitcoin task force, and this is an issue that they're looking at. So again, it's extremely important that the industry has input into these types of discussions to make sure that as the SEC is looking at this, they fully understand why this is or is not should be treated as a security. And then we also have the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. This is a very interesting agency. It's under the Federal Reserve, but they were created out of Dodd-Frank and tasked to oversee consumer protections. And they just put out an advisory last Thursday on prepaid cards, but it does affect Bitcoin. And a couple months ago, they also started collecting comments from consumers on the risk of using Bitcoin. So the CFPB is starting to get active in this debate. And because they're under the Federal Reserve, they have a different degree of oversight, which makes them a very powerful agency as well. We also have the CFTC, the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, that oversees the derivatives industry. And they've already held one public hearing on Bitcoin, and they're looking at regulating Bitcoin exchanges to offer derivative products and hedging products, which would actually be, I think, a very positive thing for the industry if we had derivative products to hedge against the volatility. And we have on our board of advisors Jim Newsom, who's the former chairman of the CFTC and who's helping provide these discussions at that agency. So, then you also have the intelligence agencies who are extremely interested in this because they want to prevent money laundering and terrorist financing. And that would also include FinCEN, which is under the Treasury, which oversees money laundering. And that's who I think has the most concerns, is that part of the federal government. So there's a lot of moving parts here. There's because digital currencies can be looked at as commodities, as property, as currency, securities. Every agency wants to assert its jurisdiction. And that's what we're having happen. And I think one of the biggest risks is having so many different regulators look at this from different perspectives. So it's extremely important that there's somebody on the ground here in Washington bringing coordination between all these different agencies and the different ways they're looking at regulating this, because if not, you're going to get the worst of every world.
Yeah, okay, I understand what you're saying there. Bear with us a moment, Perriane. I'd like to throw the mic open and encourage people in the room to ask questions. Could you please state your name and organisation? And yes, we have a question, please.
Hi, Perriane. It's Ruben Brahmanathan from Adroit Lawyers. I just wanted to ask a bit of a big picture question. You talked about the sort of the first stage of regulation, which is regulators extending, applying and interpreting existing laws. And then the second stage, obviously, is the policy-making stage. Do you have a sense of where we're at in that cycle? What's the next step, both in the US and anywhere else you're familiar with?
Yeah, sure. And I think the New York Department of Financial Services proposed license rules and regulations is a great example of this. This is a whole new regulatory framework specifically for digital currency and Bitcoin. And one thing that we've given pushback on is that we don't necessarily need a whole new regulatory regime. There is existing law, and I think the Department of Justice and the SEC's work on bringing down Silk Road and Silk Road 2.0 is a good use case that the existing laws work. So one thing we're looking at doing is providing alternative BitLicense regulations, and we're going to the Uniform Law Commission, which is a state body that tries to bring uniformity against state-regulated activities like money transmission, which in the U.S. is regulated state by state. And with something like digital currency, where there are no state lines in this economy, it makes it very, very difficult to have, if you operate an exchange or any kind of money transmission company in this country, you have to go to every single state to get a license. So we're trying to work with the Uniform Law Commission and update their Uniform Money Transmitter Act, provide a couple tweaks, add a couple different definitions, instead of and using that as a state money transmission law, as opposed to creating a whole new regulatory regime. And I think we can do that with all these different federal agencies that I just mentioned as well. Oftentimes, it's just having a little bit of clarity as what's the difference between this and the other products that they regulate. And that's why it's really important that we are working with these public policy makers to ask these types of questions and to explain to them that, what this is, the direction we want to go, and what's the best way to look at it from a public policy point of view.
One more question at the back.
Perriane, it's Ron. I'm the chairman of the Australian Digital Currency Commerce Association. How are you?
Great, thanks.
Look, Perriane, our conversation has engaged a number of stakeholders here in Australia, from the established financial sector, from regulators, from government departments, etc. I'm curious, though, given the global nature of this conversation and the fact that Bitcoin is without borders, have you had much engagement with other international counterparts yourself, any of the other associations, and what's sort of been their messaging, and can you give us a sense of what that dialogue has been like?
Well, we are focused on the U.S. federal government. That is our main focus in working with the the states in the United States is ancillary, and working with international bodies would be ancillary as well. We don't want to spread ourselves too thin because there's so much work that needs to be done just on the federal level. However, we are getting very involved with BitLicense in New York because it does have international implications, and we're already seeing that. We're getting word that there are other jurisdictions around the world that are looking at implementing their own BitLicense. And as the only framework that's been put forward, this is what different governments and different regulators are basing digital currency regulation off of. I think it's extremely important that the U.S. gets this right and that New York gets this right because it is the first time that we're seeing regulation specifically for digital currency. And again, we're providing pushback that we think that there are existing laws. We can make some updates and some definition changes and clarity changes that would be sufficient. But, we are seeing a lot of hostility from a number of different governments, from Bangladesh and China and Russia. And that is, to me, it's sad. I think we're also seeing different governments who have strong capital controls are threatened by this technology. And again, I think it's very sad if this would be pushed into the black market in those countries. So, it's extremely important that the U.S. takes a very strong position on this. This is about innovation. This is about technology. It's about bringing financial services to the 74% of the world's population that doesn't have access to basic financial services. So when working with international bodies, it's important to make the global social case for this technology and to constantly remind people that there are many areas of the world that don't have infrastructure to provide basic financial services to billions of populations around the world. And because of the decentralized nature of this, it can really bring billions of people for the first time will have the chance to enter the global economy. And that's the case we're looking to make, and we're doing that first with the U.S. federal government, and then also working with the media and building the brand around this technology. And as we move into jurisdictions around the world, that will be the same case that we're making, the social case.
Thank you for that, Perriane. There was very interesting article and made it to television. The UK Chancellor of the Exchequer was sort of photographed and filmed using a Bitcoin ATM machine in London. Certainly sent a message, I think, to a number of politicians in UK and Europe that the British government was very interested and perhaps quietly supportive of digital currencies and Bitcoin. Has anything like that happened in the US, where you have a high-profile elected politician that has either gone up to a Bitcoin machine in public or transacted in that way?
Yeah, there's actually been a few members of Congress that have started accepting Bitcoin for campaign contributions, and we want to help enable more members of Congress to be able to do that. I think it shows a strong statement that this is an acceptable means of commerce. And earlier this year, there was a digital currency demo day where Representative Jared Polis of Colorado sponsored a day for different digital currency companies to come to the Hill and demo their products. So there was an ATM, I believe it was a RoboCoin ATM, was actually brought on Capitol Hill, and Representative Jared Polis bought $10 of Bitcoin in the U.S. Capitol, and there were lots of headlines around that, and that was another very strong statement that digital currency is an acceptable form of commerce, and we should be enabling more people to be able to have access to this technology. So, it's one day at a time, it's one person at a time. It's about building relationships with these public policy makers and explaining the benefits that this technology can bring to people around the world. And as we're doing that, we're going to see more and more politicians come forward. And through our talks, we spend a significant amount of time having one-on-one meetings with different public policy makers. And there's a lot of closet Bitcoiners out there on Capitol Hill. I won't give too many names because I'll let them make their own public statement when they're ready to come out and confess their love for this technology. But I think now that we've just gotten through the midterm election, that was on November 4th, Bitcoin wasn't really a part of the national debate this midterm. But now that we're moving into a new Congress, there's been a lot of talk about this taking more of a national debate, and I think we'll see more and more people come forward.
Thank you for sharing those case studies with us. I remember from my holiday or vacation trips in America that on your notes, I think they have, is it "In God We Trust"? Printed notes?
So that is the national motto, and that's also on the House floor where the Speaker of the House speaks from. That is right over his chair. So "In God We Trust" is kind of definitely a part of our heritage here.
And if there was a motto for digital currencies, what would your thoughts be on what that would be?
I think it would be "In Math We Trust." This is a math-based technology, and I think that's what's so unique about it is it doesn't really require faith. It's already proven in a mathematical algorithm.
That's a fantastic way to end this session. In Math We Trust. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please join me in thanking Perriane Bowring? Thanks very much, Perriane.